We are, I suppose, using this episode to launch our campaign towards our second National Congress of the Revolutionary Communist Party.
Yeah, that's right.
And it's a good chance then, I think, to think a little bit about what the RCP is and how it functions internally, like how it works, how the party operates, because the Congress is probably the linchpin of all of that. So, I mean, if we were summing it up, Nelson, what would you say is the main purpose of the National Congress?
Yeah, well, the purpose is ideas, basically. The RCP is a revolutionary organization built around Marxist ideas, the orthodox, and we're not afraid of using that term, orthodox ideas of Marx, Engels, Lenin, and Trotsky. We clarify these ideas at Congress, and then we see what that means practically for us. How do we organize on the basis of these ideas for the next 12 months? Yeah,
that's it. We always say that. In fact, Ted Grant, who founded our predecessor organization, he always emphasized that a political organization is fundamentally its ideas, its program, its method, and so on. And only secondarily is its organizational structures. So yeah, the Congress, as you said, is to clarify the ideas. I mean, we will be discussing at the Congress, well, there's a lot of things to discuss, a lot of political ideas, events to discuss. And that is typically how we structure the Congress. We start off with a discussion on world perspectives and the world situation. I mean, there's a lot to talk about there, no?
Yeah. I mean, just looking at the situation of the relationships between the world powers at the moment, you've got a situation where we have what we describe as a relative decline of US imperialism and the rise of other imperialist powers like Russia and China. And it's having a massively destabilizing effect.
Yeah. I mean, I literally just before we turned the camera on, I was reading through the live updates on the BBC on the situation. Zelensky's just given a press conference. We're recording this on Wednesday. He's just given a press conference talking about how he thinks Trump is living in a disinformation space created by Russia. Trump is obviously going to react very badly to that, but Zelensky is in turn reacting to things that Trump has said that he doesn't like. I mean, these negotiations that are starting to take shape directly between the US and Russia, with Zelensky excluded, Europeans sulking on the sidelines, this is a major shift in world relations. And this, I think, is the context in which we need to understand our work in Britain. So I think there'll be a lot of discussion around world relations at the Congress for sure.
Yeah.
I mean, we'll also, I suppose, be discussing the world economy, no?
Definitely. I mean, obviously, the world economy is in deep crisis right now. You look at a country like Germany, for example, which was previously held up as the powerhouse of the European economy in a really dominant position. I think they're entering into their third straight year of recession,
yes, that's it.
Which is really unprecedented. And that has enormous implications for the rest of the Eurozone as well.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I think world economic perspectives are going to determine a lot. The reason we talk about economic perspectives and what's going on in the capitalist economy is so that we can understand what's the impact this is going to have on the working class and therefore on the class struggle. How are working class people going to respond to this massive economic crisis? Because that will determine a lot about how we participate in those movements, how we intervene and so on.
Yeah.
I mean, the world situation flows directly into the British situation.
Yeah.
That's why we start with world perspectives, but then probably the major discussion of the weekend will be at the Congress will be on British perspectives.
Yeah.
And that's the political perspectives, the economic perspectives for Britain, and the social situation, the situation with the class struggle. We always start with a bit of a discussion about kind of the historical context of Britain and British capitalism and where it's come from, where it's going. We always talk about the special crisis of British capitalism. If you were going to sum that up, Nelson, like the special crisis of British capitalism in a nutshell, how would you describe that to the comrades?
I guess I describe it as a long, sustained period of decline, where over the past 100 years, over 100 years really, British capitalism has been in decline. Not to say that Britain is not a rich and powerful capitalist country, it is, but the point is it's actually fallen behind in comparison to its competitors, particularly in Europe.
Yeah, and that is a special situation in the sense that Britain was the foremost imperialist power in the world, and as you say, now it's declining. That gives a particular character to its economy and to its the outlook of its political representatives, which isn't the case for countries that weren't previously the most dominant power and now are declining. So I will get into that a little bit more at the Congress. I imagine a bit of discussion about that and its implications, what it means. But we're also thinking then more contemporary questions about the political perspectives for Britain.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think follows kind of directly from the world situation is this rise of, I guess, what people would call right-wing populism. You know, we've got obviously Trump in America, you've got the rise of the AfD in Germany, Le Pen in France, and obviously now in Britain, you've got the sort of a remarkable rise of Nigel Farage and the Reform Party, who I think by some polling, they're actually first.
Yeah, I've seen a couple of put them first, yeah. And I was thinking about this, well, we were talking about it, weren't we, recently, that I remember, I can't remember exactly when it was, 2014 maybe, or maybe later than that, 2016. Yeah, must have been later than that. 2016, 17. UKIP was doing very well in the polls.
Yeah.
But that wasn't really translating into seats, whereas the polling that's coming out now is suggesting that the votes that Reform could get would actually translate into a lot of seats.
Yeah, I
saw one poll a few days ago, I can't remember exactly when, saying that they would get a majority. I think that was a bit of an outlier. I think most are not predicting an actual majority for Reform. But yeah, I mean the question we have to pose, I think, because what is the purpose of perspectives? The reason we discuss this stuff is not just to make ourselves feel clever or good or just because it's kind of interesting in an academic way. It's so that we can, if not predict, we don't have the crystal ball, but basically anticipate some of the processes and where they're leading, so we're not taken by surprise as things develop. The question we've got to ask ourselves, and that all the comrades should ask themselves in advance of the Congress, and it should be discussed in the branches, what's going to happen in 5 years' time? What is the next election going to bring? I mean, what do you think? Do you think the Labour Party is gonna do well at the next election? Well,
I mean, judging by the lack of popularity of Starman, is rapid decline. I think in the approval ratings, I think it goes to show how much hatred there is of Starmer, of the Labour Party, and I would say of the entire political establishment in this country. The question we ask as well about, you know, right-wing populism and people like Farage is why? Why is this happening? Why is there this mood where a relatively new political party and a figure like Farage, who was really on the fringes of politics until, I think, you know, the last few years, how can they become so popular and so prominent? And I think it is the absolute hatred and disgust of all of the capitalist establishment and their political representatives, people like Starmer, and obviously people like Kenny Badenoch, and prior to that, Rishi Sunak.
Yeah, that's it. And I think, I mean, funnily enough, you know, I saw something or I heard something. I think it was Tony Blair said something. The Labour Party has to be seen, he's obviously giving advice to the government. He says you have to be seen as disruptive. You cannot be seen as establishment because people hate the establishment. That's the only way to beat Reform. But obviously the Labour Party is the establishment, is operating like this Labour government is operating entirely for the establishment. So I think it is going to be smashed at the next election, which then raises the question, well, what is going to replace it? And right now, a lot can change, as we know, in a few years. But right now, it's looking like Reform, some kind of right populism. This is, as you say, this is the pattern internationally. This is the perspective in Britain. It might feel like something far away, but actually, like you look at Austria, for example, recent elections there, it did deliver a victory for the far right, for the right populists, basically. It's not a million miles from Britain.
In Germany, they're trying to artificially block the AfD from getting support and from winning those elections, which is only going to backfire on them and increase their popularity, if you ask me.
So understanding that phenomenon, as you say, understanding where it's come from, and also what it represents, this question of fascism comes up a lot. Is this a march towards fascism, for example? This will all need to be discussed and debated out properly at the Congress. in terms of our perspectives. But the other thing, and all of this discussion actually does raise something that we've mentioned before on this podcast, but it's a question that we will need to really get to grips with at the Congress, is where are the lefts? I mean, we're talking about anti-establishment mood. Why is that anti-establishment mood taking a right-wing expression and not a left-wing expression?
Exactly. I mean, that's one of the key questions. The complete lack of any sort of radical or left-wing alternative being provided. You know, you've got to ask yourself, where are the leaders of the labour movement? Where is the big movement against figures like Farage, against Reform UK, against even people like Tommy Robinson, who are sort of whipping up all of this racism and xenophobia online? There should be a fight back against this. This is what people are looking for. And yet it's complete silence and complete capitulation from these so-called lefts.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are so-called left MPs in Parliament who in the past were very vocal and coming out with all sorts of ideas and suggestions. I mean, Corbyn is still an MP.
Yeah.
We haven't heard much from him lately. There doesn't seem to be any voices on the left, and the field of battle has basically been entirely ceded to the right, that anti-establishment space, or the anti-establishment voice that people are looking for. It's not being put forward from the left. You have probably one of the worst left ever that I can think of, like in terms of the rottenness, the failure to put anything forward. So yeah, I think this is something that we should try and get to grips with at the Congress as well, like understanding that. And then obviously that does flow into then some of our tasks as the Revolutionary Communist Party. We are too small to be the anti-establishment voice on the left. We understand that. We know that.
Yeah.
And therefore, the biggest task is for us to get bigger and become that voice. But I suppose there'll be a whole session at the Congress on like an organisational session on the development of the party and so on. The first thing we'll have to do is review our last couple of years of work. I mean, you think back April 2023, our National Congress in 2023 is when we launched the Are You a Communist campaign. Last year, we founded the Revolutionary Communist Party at our Congress. These are some big things that I suppose we need to draw a balance sheet of, go over. I'd be interested to hear some of the reports that the comrades bring to the Congress of how things have developed over the last couple of years and things that have gone well, things that haven't gone so well, and what we can learn from that moving forward. Particularly looking forward to hearing about some of the reports of student work that has been going on at the universities. Because certainly since September, we've had a real big push on that, the freshers' fairs. There's a lot of student members of the RCP who have set up societies at universities, Marxist societies, communist societies, and so on, putting on discussions. And in some places, we've been running some campaigns lately. In Leeds right now, we're running a campaign where our comrade's been barred from the student union elections. I'm keen to hear a little bit about some of the student work. I'm hoping the comrades will bring some reports about that. I mean, what else are we thinking about for the Congress? What else is going to be coming up?
Yeah, lots to discuss. I mean, I'm quite excited to hear about the education work.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Obviously, we mentioned that ideas are fundamental to the RCP, and obviously educating ourselves is key. And we've had a number of what we describe as cadre schools, right? Schools for educating comrades.
What is actually, sorry, like maybe just explain a little bit, like what we talk about cadres. What is a cadre for the RCP?
Well, a cadre is a military term, actually. And it refers basically to someone who's capable of training a large amount of people very quickly in the heat of a moment. And obviously we apply this to what we do and the organizational work we do, and that means training people in Marxist ideas, being able to understand Marxist ideas, to think for yourself, and to apply them in a given situation, and to assess a situation and to be able to build and organize. We need people that can do that. Yeah. And so much of what we do is geared towards training people in Marxism so they can do that. And these cadre schools are entirely focused on raising the political level, raising the understanding of the comrades. And we've had these cadre schools all across the country. We've had them in Yorkshire, had them in the East, in London, in the South. And for example, the London cadre school that took place recently, I think we sold over £250 worth of Marxist literature. Yeah.
And that was, I mean, how many people were there? 50, 60 people?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
That's a lot, yeah. I mean, clearly there's a big interest in the books that we got on sale.
Exactly. And the thing is, there's many different ways to educate people, but I'm keen to hear exactly how the comrades have gone about doing that. For example, some of the reports I've heard from Yorkshire are really interesting in terms of the discussions they've had. That CADA school, it actually started with a discussion on art and revolution. It might seem a bit strange to a lot of people who say, what are communists doing discussing art and revolution? Well, the point is that Marxists and communists, we fight for so much more than just what we'd call bread and butter questions, as important as they are, right? It's about more than just fighting for a loaf of bread, a roof over your head, all of those things, as significant as they are. It's about giving a life that's worth living for people. And art is part of that.
Yes.
Another discussion that was taking place at that event was a discussion on Venezuela and the Bolivarian Revolution. Because it's all well and good about talking about revolution, right, and talking about communism, but what happens when a revolution actually happens?
Yes.
Because it's not perfect. It's not a textbook thing. It's not going to fit your rigid schema of what a revolution might look like. So how do you orientate towards it? How do you understand what takes place? And also, how do you change position when the situation changes?
Yes. Yeah, brilliant. I mean, and as you said, these kind of schools are going on all over the country. If we can get a layer of our membership trained up to be those cadres that you described, that is laying the basis for much bigger steps forward in the future. Yeah, that will be very good to hear some of the reports of that education work at the Congress. And as well as reviewing stuff that we've done, we'll be thinking at the Congress also about our next steps organizationally. How are we going to take the next steps in our growth, in our campaigning work? It'll be a bit of an opportunity, getting the whole party in one room, all the delegates, all the representatives of the different branches, and laying out some plans for what will hopefully be a bit of a push outwards, I would say, in the second half of the year. We can deal with that in more detail in the next couple of months. But I mean, another key part of the Congress is the international dimension to it. We often have international visitors at the Congress, and there's always an international report about how our work is developing overseas, because the Revolutionary Communist Party is part of the Revolutionary Communist International. That is a political question for us. You cannot have socialism in one country. When capitalism has integrated the world market in the way that it has, the working class very much in a practical sense is international. And so we have to have socialist revolution all across the world, and therefore we are part of an international. And we'll have a bit of an update and a report on that. I mean, I'm particularly looking forward to hearing about updates, funnily enough, from Denmark. It doesn't feel like the kind of place where there'd be massive revolutionary developments, but I know that our group there, our section there, has grown very, very quickly in the recent period, to the point where they're in the media, they're in the bourgeois, they're covered in the bourgeois media very frequently. And in fact, this was reported on Marxist.com actually. They had some liberal journalist kind of infiltrate a meeting. I don't think he told the comrades who he was, but he went to a meeting and then wrote it up as a big centre page spread in one of the main kind of liberal newspapers, a Guardian equivalent, I suppose. And he was talking there, basically what he wrote is that he said the modern Danish communist knows their Marxist theory inside out, is very proud of their ideas, is capable of explaining it in modern language, and is ideologically driven, basically, and optimistic and determined to change the world. And he says, why are liberals not more like this? Why can't we be like this? He recognises there's a very open front on in ideological terms, in the ideological struggle. And the way he put it is basically he was a bit worried at how strong our comrades in Denmark were in qualitative terms, in terms of their understanding of the ideas, their ability to explain them and win people over to them. Anyway, they're obviously doing very good work in Denmark, so I'm quite interested to hear some of the reporting around that.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, what other sections will we hear reports from, do you think?
I mean, you mentioned the sort of interest that the bourgeois, sort of the enemies of revolution are giving us in Denmark. Austria is another country where actually the comrades have come under scrutiny and attack, actually, by the state, by their political enemies. And I was actually fortunate enough to go to the Austrian summer camp.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Last year. I could bring some of the lessons from what we've done in Britain, for example, the Are You a Communist campaign, to their meeting, and to bring back a lot of lessons about their events and how they run things, and as well the political situation in a country like that. I mean, that was a really inspiring event for me.
Yes. Well, yeah, hopefully we'll get a few international visitors who can run through different. I mean, there's lots that could be discussed. The reports from Pakistan are always very inspiring. There's lots going on, obviously, in the US in terms of the political situation, but also the work that our comrades are doing there. I had an interesting report from Yugoslavia recently. Also, we refer to our group of comrades in those countries, the former Yugoslavia, as our Yugoslav section.
Rightfully so.
Yeah, and they obviously in Serbia there's been a massive student movement, so they were giving an interesting report about that. Right. Some of the Latin American comrades, they've been doing very well in Mexico recently. So it'll be very interesting to hear some of these reports. It really brings home what we are as an organisation, as an international. Yeah, that would be very good. So these are the main topics that will be discussed at the Congress. Maybe we should talk a little bit about how the Congress will actually work, because the Congress is a decision-making body, isn't it? It's not just for abstract discussion. There's a real decision-making content to it. I mean, there's discussions, there's debates, there's documents that get drafted, amendments that get put to them, and then we have some debates out. I mean, this has always been a feature. You and I, Nelson, we've been to a lot of congresses in our time. This is the second Congress of the RCP that we're approaching, but we obviously went to congresses of our predecessor organisation. I mean, I remember we've had quite a few debates there on important political questions. I remember a debate, it was around the time of Brexit, on what our position should be as an organisation at that time. Because on the one hand, we are opposed to the European Union. It's a boss's club. It was formed for that purpose, to basically improve the ability of the European bourgeoisie to exploit the European working class. That's the purpose of the European Union. So we're opposed to that, but did that mean in that circumstance we should support the Brexit vote? This was the debate.
Exactly. And, with hindsight, obviously, it's easy to look back and say, well, obviously Brexit was a reactionary development. But at that time, we had to deal with an unfolding situation, and there was confusion. There was political confusion. I remember very distinctly many prominent sort of members of the so-called left in this country calling for a Lexit, supporting Brexit on the basis of it being some sort of a progressive step forward. The argument was literally that they would have a Brexit, and then that would be a stepping stone towards, a socialist revolution in Britain. This was the type of stuff that was coming out.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that debate was very, like, that line being put forward by some people on the left was quite an abstract one, because yes, obviously, in general terms, we are opposed to the European Union, and certainly in the past, the position of the Labour movement was opposed to the European Union for that reason. But in that particular context at that time, during that campaign, on the one side of the campaign, you had David Cameron, who was arguing for Remain, and he was leading that side of the debate. And on the other side, leading the Brexit side of the debate, was Boris Johnson. And Jeremy Corbyn had vacated the Brexit scene, basically. He was just sort of tail-ending the Remain camp, the stay in the European Union camp. So there was no strong left case being put forward for Brexit. And the idea that a Brexit vote would in fact strike some blow on behalf of the European working class, or working class Britain, against the European Union was a bit of a fantasy. Yeah. And that's kind of what we put forward. We said, and in the end we took an independent class position. That's what that Congress decided. We said we need to put an independent position here that doesn't hitch our wagon either to David Cameron or to Boris Johnson, but that explains the situation properly and clearly to people. And I think, with hindsight, that is vindicated, that we took the right decision there in the end. But that was a very interesting and useful debate. And actually, when you think about it, it's kind of an anticipation of some of the discussions that we will be having around right populism at this Congress, because that Brexit vote also, there was a huge anti-establishment component to it.
That's right, yeah.
It was wrapped up in Boris Johnson's populism, in his right-wing populism and the xenophobia and racism of it, but it was also that the Remain vote, the pro-EU vote, was seen as an establishment position, and people wanted to kick out against that.
That's right.
The point is, there was no left expression of that, and we were not big enough or strong enough at that time to be the full expression of that. We put that position forward as an independent position, but I think some of the debates actually around that Brexit question will be very relevant to this Congress we've got coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, we also had I remember other interesting debates. A couple of years before that Brexit one at Congress, we were debating perspectives for Labour in Scotland, the Labour Party in Scotland, which was around the time of the referendum.
That's right. Yeah.
And I mean, that obviously Labour had been dominant in Scotland for a very long time, but that referendum campaign had really put Labour once again in the camp of the establishment. Mm-hmm. And there was a kick against it. It was probably the first example, really, of a major kick against the establishment post 2008 crisis. Mm-hmm. And Labour was on the wrong side of it. And so we were discussing, well, what does that mean for the Labour Party? Is it seen any longer as a reference point for young, radical, left-wing people, as perhaps it had been in the past in Scotland? Or has it been supplanted in that by the SNP? And the conclusion we came to at the time is, yes, it has been supplanted in that by, maybe not by the SNP, but certainly by the question of independence. That became the anti-establishment position.
Yeah, and that's only really very recently began to sort of change, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think, clearly. I mean, for a long time, the SNP, people the bourgeois were describing Scotland as this one-party state, the SNP, one of the. It's true that at the last election, that did change a little bit. I wouldn't say that's through any great enthusiasm for Labour, though.
Absolutely.
And more because the SNP had hit basically a dead end with its independent strategy, and then it was mired in various scandals and things like this. Mm-hmm. But even then, I don't think Labour is this reference point for radicalised young people. I think the independence question is still there in the mix. And I mean, you look at the polling now, actually, under the impact, as we were discussing earlier, of this massive unpopularity of the Labour government, and what you see is an increase in support for independence once again. Yeah. So I think, I think Labour, I think the discussions we had at that time were very important to understand what was actually quite a massive shift in the situation, which we're still, they're still having ramifications today. We will have to discuss Scotland, the question of independence, Scottish Labour, the SNP, and so on at the Congress, also coming up in a couple of months' time. But these are the kind of debates, discussions that we have. Documents are produced, and there's voting on it, and so on. Obviously, what we do is we have our discussions, but then we take decisions and we act upon them. Yeah, I mean, this is something that this kind of tradition, this democratic tradition, has a long history in communist circles, in Bolshevik circles. It's described often when, for example, Lenin and Trotsky are writing about it as democratic centralism. Mm-hmm. If you were to sum up in a nutshell, Nelson, like the method of democratic centralism, just in a few sentences, how would you do that?
Yeah, I mean, democratic centralism is about being flexible and democratic in your discussion, in your clarification of your ideas. But when you vote and decide on a line, you follow it. There is unity in action. Mm. And that allows us, I think, to be, as I said, flexible enough to be able to discuss and properly debate and get as much input as we can from across the party into what our political ideas should be. But once we decide them, we actually have to carry that through. We need to have unity in action in order to be a party that actually doesn't just, as you say, discuss things, but actually does stuff.
Yeah, that's it. And it's that flexibility and that interrelationship actually between democracy and centralism. We need maximum input and maximum debate. Not everyone's always going to have exactly the same opinion. There'll be shades of grey and so on. And that's a useful thing. That helps us clarify exactly what it is we think and exactly what we should do. But then once we take a decision, we do actually then do it.
Yeah.
And that's where the centralism comes in. Neither of those things are alien to other organizations, I would say.
No, exactly. I mean, you look at all these other organizations which exist, not even necessarily political ones. It's amazing that sort of people sometimes kind of shriek in horror at the idea of a revolutionary party being centralized and having a leadership, when actually you look at, say, the military, for example, obviously, there to defend the interests of the ruling class, but they are highly centralized and they're highly disciplined, and they have a leadership which is top down, and they're very, say, ruthless and efficient, in carrying out what they think is necessary for their interests.
Yes, that's right. And then you look on the other side and you see So that's an example of a highly centralized part of the bourgeois state, of the ruling class institutions. They also have things like Parliament, which is just a cavern of hot air. It's all discussion, it's all rhetorical debates. Motions get passed, resolutions get passed, laws get passed. They get acted upon sometimes, they don't get acted upon other times. It doesn't really make a difference. It's all grandstanding and it's all for their own careers and this and that. It's pointless, empty discussion. And obviously what we are aiming at is, yes, maximum discussion and debate, that side of it we want, but not just for its own sake. We also then are the ones who want to put that into practice.
Yeah.
And yeah, as you say, I mean, I think it's a bit of an anarchist tendency to say, well, we shouldn't really have centralism. We should just have lots of discussion, and it tends to go round and round in circles. I mean, I've witnessed this in anarchist kind of organizing spaces on the left, where you just have endless discussion until you can find some kind of consensus. But all that means is you reduce the discussion to its lowest common denominator. What is the thing that every single person in this room can agree on? It's typically something banal. It's something that doesn't really mean anything at all, and is actually quite useless as an instrument to work off, to actually do anything with. That's not at all the method that you need to actually get things done. Maximum discussion, but then a vote, and the majority vote is then what is acted upon.
Exactly. I think the way Trotsky describes it is that these people spend time looking for the fourth dimension of internal democracy. It doesn't exist.
Yeah.
It doesn't exist.
That's right. And I mean, this is also connected to the question of leadership. So our Congress elects a national leadership, a central committee, we call it, of, I think at the moment, the central committee is about 40, 45 people. And that is the 40, 45 most politically able people in the party who are capable of working together as a team. It's not a federal body in that it's not like one representative from every branch or one representative from every region. It's not like that, but it is a team, and it needs to be constructed on the basis of thinking that way. So a good geographical spread, a good spread across different fields of work, universities, workplaces, and so on. A good mixture of youth and experience and all this kind of thing. It's got to operate as a team for sure. But yeah, that central committee then has the responsibility to lead the organization, lead the party in between congresses. And it meets every couple of months or so for that purpose. That kind of leadership, I think, is very important, no? Yeah.
I mean, again, people seem to sort of recall in horror the idea of there being sort of an elected leadership. But again,
some anarchists recoil in horror.
Exactly. But actually, if you look at the history, say, for example, of the Bolshevik Party, right, which is a revolutionary party which did manage to carry out a successful socialist revolution and establish the world's first worker state, what role did Lenin play in that party? He played overwhelmingly a leading role. He played a key role in writing the documents, in leading the discussions, in setting actually the political tone and this and the perspectives for that party. It was not a secondary, subordinate role in relation to that. So, as you say, a leadership is not just a necessary evil that we have to suffer. It's actually a necessity if a party or an organization is trying to get something done.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's exactly it. This is a very important function of the Congress is to put that leadership in place. As well as a decision-making body, I suppose the Congress is also, I think we'd describe it as a school. It's an educational event also. It's the place where, it's one of very few events that we have in a year where the most talented and able comrades from all over the country are all in a room together and can have very high-level political discussions and bring together all the experience that they have also from around the country. I mean, this is something that, historically speaking as well, this is the function I think that Lenin and Trotsky have described Congresses as playing.
Yeah, definitely.
I mean, you take the Third International as an example, which was their Communist International. they explicitly described the Third International as a school of communism through which they were trying to educate the leaders of the young, new communist parties all across the rest of the world.
Exactly. The Bolsheviks, they went to considerable effort to have these congresses and these schools. For example, in 1918, the Bolsheviks, they had 4, I think, all-Russian Soviet congresses, which is, by the way, was in the year of civil war.
Yes.
Which shows the extent to which they saw it as necessary to clarify these ideas. And the Comintern, which you mentioned, discussed all sorts of important questions which affected the revolutionary struggle, not just in Russia, but of course all across the world. They discussed the national question, the colonial question. They had debates about women's oppression.
Yes.
And all of these discussions, they served to educate, as you said, the cadres and the revolutionaries of all of these other nations which were going to lead the communist parties and the revolutionary struggle where they were.
Yeah, and they were having these congresses and debates at a time of extreme turbulence in the world situation and very sharp changes. Similar, actually, to the situation we face today in that sense, in the sense that things can change very quickly. And you can compare, they had perspective discussions. What is the state of world capitalism at this particular moment in time? And how that changed. Like 1919, 1920 was a kind of revolutionary period. The working class was taking power in some places. And then 21, 22, capitalism has stabilized itself and the ruling class went on the offensive. Certain tactics flowed from that. What the communists should be doing in certain countries had a direct impact on Britain. Lenin wrote Left-Wing Communism, addressing the questions in Britain, partially, with that text as well, around this time. So it was essential to have those congresses to orientate the ranks of the communist parties around the world. And that is the function of this Congress as well. It's true we're not in the position that the Third International was in, with mass communist parties and they'd taken power in Russia and things like that. We're clearly not in that position. But nevertheless, it plays that role as an educational tool for developing the party. And it's also a bit of a chance just to discuss with people. I mean, the sessions are very important, but just having lunch with the comrades from around the country, or having a drink with them in the evening, or just chatting in the corridors, you can learn a lot that way as well from an educational point of view. I certainly have learned a lot in those kind of discussions before.
Exactly. And I often find that is the best way of finding out what's actually going on in the party. What is the internal life? What are the activities of the party? What successes the comrades are having nationally, and also what problems are coming up nationally, and how the comrades locally are dealing with it. Because the situation, of course, broadly speaking, the political situation as it is in Britain, but that will look different in different places. And the comrades will have different ways of dealing with them, and they will react to these problems. And I think we can learn so much from just coming together and speaking about them.
Yeah, absolutely. It plays a big role in that. I mean, I suppose the other function of the Congress, which isn't really a secondary one, is that it's a major fundraising event for us. We have 2 big fundraising events, I suppose, in the year. And this is one of them. The fundraising is extremely important. We've covered this, I think, in previous podcast episodes. I'm sure the comrades are broadly familiar. Like, we don't have big sponsors. We don't have outside support. It's a political question. It's a point of pride that we fund ourselves independently. That's what keeps our politics independent.
Yeah.
But for that, we rely on collections that will take place at the Congress. So certainly the branches all need to be thinking about that now in the run up to the Congress. How are we going to raise a bit of money? Who can we approach? Maybe they're not members of the RCP, but they're sympathetic. They could make some donations and so on.
Yeah, I think one comrade managed to get a donation from their lecturer.
Oh, really? Well, there you go. Yeah. There'll be loads of people out there who are seeing what we're doing, like it. They might not be able or willing to join the party, but they'll be willing to make a donation. We should have a real push on that, I think, in the run up to the Congress. It's a good opportunity for that. But then, I mean, the branches also typically at the Congress will come up with all kinds of imaginative ways of raising money. Creating merchandise of one kind or another is a popular one.
Yeah.
I remember I saw at the Congress last year, there's always a lot of T-shirts, a lot of kind of notebooks. I think it was a Revolution Festival rather than the Congress, but one of the comrades, Frank, who's a talented photographer, had taken pictures of a lot of the comrades in the party have political tattoos, and he'd taken like pictures of their tattoo. It was very artistically done. I think that was a nice idea, and then he kind of put them together in an album and was selling the albums and making a bit of money to donate to the party off the back of that.
Yeah, we have an extraordinary amount of talent, I think, across the party, and that only increases as we grow. And we win over, really talented people. And I think the comrades are finding more and more ways of using those talents and that creativity to help raise money and to help us build.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what we need. So, yeah, that's a major, between now and the Congress, that is a major task, I would say, of the branches to think about their fundraising. I mean, what else do we want the branches to be thinking about over the Congress is early May. We're now a good chunk of the way into February, 2.5 months approximately. Raising money is one thing. What else are we getting the branch to think about?
Yeah, I mean, this sort of period that we're in now, this pre-Congress period, it's about raising the political level and the political understanding.
Yes.
Because we'll have a couple of draft documents that will go out to all comrades very shortly. And those are going to be the documents on the political situation in Britain and also the organisational tasks, what we're supposed to be doing. And it's important that comrades really read these documents thoroughly and discuss them at a local level in branch, because that activity, that is the life of the party. And comrades need to understand, what it means for their day-to-day work, because of course none of this is going to be possible without those comrades discussing these ideas and then going out and putting them into practice.
Yeah, absolutely. And we want that Congress to be a real display of a very deep political understanding of what's going on, so that we can educate the newer layer of comrades that we might have at the Congress. And part of that will be the debate, it'll be the discussion. I mean, we want branches to consider drafting amendments, for example, in advance of the Congress to submit to the documents. And those amendments, we need them to be kind of political amendments, I think.
Yeah.
We don't want, we were talking earlier about some debates that we've had at previous Congresses, big questions, Brexit, perspective of the Labour Party in Scotland. We have also had some slightly silly debates at Congresses in the past.
Yeah, not as significant, I think, in terms of the political implications. We've had, for example, comrades that have been raising amendments on language, questioning whether we're being a bit too rude, to our political enemies, the ruling class.
I remember that. I think that the debate was over, like, should we be calling the bourgeois stupid or not? And I don't think that was a particularly useful political debate to be having.
No. I mean, especially considering, you look at the way that the bourgeois talk about us, the way they talk about communists, it's with far more crude language.
Yeah, that's right. I don't think we need to worry about the feelings of the bourgeois or anything else, or little individual things like that. So when it comes to drafting amendments, we need like substantive political points, basically. Yeah. We don't need small changes to language. We don't need, anything like that. We also don't necessarily need kind of additions of facts. That might be interesting to bring out. Comrades are always encouraged to write articles for the paper and the website that cover kind of factual questions that develop the perspectives in that way. But we don't just need reams of facts. We need political analysis. Exactly. So if there's a change or a question over the political analysis in the documents, then that's what we need to have a debate over, and that will help. That will play a really helpful role in clarifying things.
Exactly, understanding what the perspectives documents are there to do is important, because of course sometimes too many facts can actually obfuscate the point you're making. You get lost in facts when we're looking to get across the general course of development of the political situation, rather than covering every little detail that may or may not happen.
Yeah, exactly that. Good. So that's mainly what we need, I think, from the branch in the next period. That's what hopefully we can get the ball rolling with over the next few weeks. It's discussing the documents, raising the political level in the branches. I think probably above all, it's just generally tightening up the branches. That's what we need between now and the Congress. We need nice, tight, disciplined, well-organized branches with a very high level of political education going on in them.
Yeah.
And then we want, what would be ideal is if the delegates could come to the Congress and report on how that work of tightening up the branches and strengthening things has gone, ready for us to then use those nice, tight branches to take a big step forward in the second half of the year and launch some more outward-facing campaigning of some kind, recruitment drive, whatever it is. We will discuss this at the Congress in some detail, exactly what our next steps are. But we want to get to that Congress in as strong a possible position. I would say that's the main task between now and the start of May.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. Well, I think we've covered what we want to cover. So thanks, Nelson, and we'll come back again next week.